Well, let me welcome you all here tonight on behalf of the Woodrow Wilson School here at Princeton. We have two very distinguished guests who are going to debate the issue of intelligent design. Is it science? My name is Russ Neely. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Politics here at Princeton, which is the building right next door. I'm also a freshman advisor at one of Princeton's undergraduate living facilities. As we look around us on this planet, we see all manner of living things that, to the uneducated masses of humanity, have always appeared to be the product of intelligently designed, goal-directed activity. But the tendency among most biological scientists is to reject the notion of design, teleology, or goal-directed activity as explanatory causes for the mechanisms of life. Life, biological theorists like Richard Dawkins and many others contend, only appears to be the result of the goal-directed activity of a designing intelligence. In truth, say such theorists, life on Earth is, in all its forms, is a product of an ends-blind process of natural selection, working on replicator molecules or other self-reproducing mechanisms that have emerged on their own and evolve over time with no relation to any kind of higher purpose, design, teleology, or creative intelligence. Sometimes referred to as the neo-Darwinian, grew out of the synthesis of Mendelian genetics with modern microbiology. Over the past 2 decades, however, a small number of philosophers, intellectuals, scientists, and scholars have come to question some of the basic tenets of the neo-Darwinian synthesis. These thinkers contend that the naive view of the uneducated public, most of whom believe that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth and all the life that would eventually flourish on the earth, that this view is probably closer to the truth in certain important ways than the more sophisticated views of the neo-Darwinians, insofar at least as the latter deny that nature accords evidence of the workings of any kind of higher order intelligence. These thinkers have come to be known as theorists of intelligent design. While most intelligent design theorists accept important aspects of the neo-Darwinian synthesis, including the adaptation of existing living organisms to their environment by a process of natural selection, they challenge the neo-Darwinian orthodoxy on many points, and their challenge is always made on what they at least believe is factual, evidentiary, or logical grounds. Intelligent design theory, as proponents say, should be seen as a scientific hypothesis to be accepted or rejected not on the basis of faith, intuition, religious belief, or dogma, but like any scientific hypothesis, on how well it explains the facts that we observe in nature. And that is where we stand today. Intelligent design theory, is it a science, as its proponents claim, or is it something else? Is it obscurantism, religion, biblical faith, charlatanry, pseudoscience, as many of its opponents charge? And here is where it's hoped, we hope that our two distinguished speakers will be able to enlighten us. And we have two very, very distinguished speakers tonight. Indeed, I think if you comb the whole country, you would be hard put to find two better representatives of the two contrasting viewpoints than the speakers that are going to debate tonight. Before I say something about the two speakers and the format of the debate, however, I just want to thank the people who have sponsored this. I mentioned the Woodrow Wilson School. This debate is also sponsored by the Intercollegiate Studies Institute and by the Arthur Roop Foundation. And most of the groundwork here has been laid by Chad Kiefer. Where's Chad? Oh, stand up, say hello. Oh, there he is back there. And by Kelly Hanlon, which both of whom we would like to thank for their efforts in getting this debate together. The first speaker speaking in the affirmative in favor of intelligent design is Professor William Dembski. Professor Demsky is a research professor in the Foundations of Science at Baylor University and is a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute in Seattle. His higher education began at the Chicago campus of the University of Illinois, where he received a bachelor's degree in psychology. From the same school, he went on to earn a Master's of Science degree in statistics and a PhD in philosophy. Apparently not thinking that he was educated enough, he would later go on to the University of Chicago, where he earned a second PhD, this time in mathematics. Professor Demsky has done postdoc work in several other major research universities, including work in mathematics at MIT, in physics at the University of Chicago, and in computer science here at Princeton. In his spare time, he managed to get a master's degree of divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary. Professor Demsky has published many scholarly articles in journals of mathematics and philosophy, and has become one of the most sophisticated and articulate defenders of the theory of intelligent design. He has written and edited several books, including The Design Inference Eliminating Chance Through Small Probabilities, which was published in 1998 by Cambridge University Press, and is one of the most mathematically sophisticated treatments of intelligent design in print. Arguing on the negative side is Professor Lee Silver, who I am sure many of you already know. Professor Silver is a professor in the department of, for many years here, in the Department of Molecular Biology. He is also now a professor in the Woodrow Wilson School here, and has joint appointments with the Office of Population Research, with the programs in science, technology, and environmental policy, and with the Center for Health and Well-Being. He began his undergraduate years at the University of Pennsylvania, where he received a BA majoring in physics. He went on to Harvard, where he received his PhD in the field of biophysics, and subsequently trained at New York's Sloan Kettering Institute of Cancer Research, perhaps the preeminent cancer research center in the United States. He has also worked at the prestigious Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory on Long Island, and in 1993 he was elected a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Professor Silver has published over 180 scholarly articles in fields such as genetics, evolution, embryology, and computer modeling. And in recent years, he has developed a special scholarly interest in the interface between law, ethics, religion, and biotechnology. He teaches a course here, in fact, in the Woodrow Wilson School, which deals with just that latter issue. Professor Silver has written 2 textbooks on genetics, and is the author of the acclaimed book, Remaking Eden, How Genetic Engineering and Cloning Will Transform the American Family, which has been translated into 15 foreign languages. He has recently finished a new book, which will come out very soon, Challenging Mother Nature, Technology in a Spiritual World. Professor Silver has served on many influential boards, including the Jersey Bioethics Commission, and is one of Princeton University's leading public intellectuals. Indeed, he is something of a celebrity intellectual, having appeared on TV shows such as Nightline, Nova, the Jim Lehrer NewsHour, Charlie Minutes, and 2020. The debate is going to take place according to the following format. We're going to begin with an opening statement by the affirmative Professor Demsky. He's going to have 15 minutes. Then we're going to have an opening negative statement by Professor Silver. That's also going to be 15 minutes. It's going to be followed by a Demsky affirmative rebuttal, 5 minutes, a Silver negative rebuttal, 5 minutes, and then 2 second affirmative and second negative rebuttals. An affirmative question is going to come from Professor Demsky, a negative response to that question, Professor Silver. A negative question for the opponent is going to come then from Professor Silver, an affirmative response to the negative from Professor Demsky, and then finally there's going to be 2 closing statements, a negative and affirmative. After the debate is completed then, we're going to open it up for audience questions. The audience question period will only have maybe about 20 or at most 25 minutes, but we hope that by that time you have received a great deal of wisdom from our 2 distinguished speakers. With the question period, when you want to ask questions, just raise your hand and I'll call upon you. And I think there's a roving microphone. If not, I'll repeat your question so it can be recorded in the recording system that's being used here. So without further ado, let's begin with the first opening affirmative statement from Professor Dembski. Thank you very much. That's just for security purposes. Any large gathering at university, they'll have security present. There's nothing. There's no suspicion about people.
I know it is a contentious issue, but there are limits. Well, it's good to be back here. I think it's been about 7 or 8 years since I've been back to this town. I've always liked it. I met my wife here, so it's got a special place for me. I want to start with the whole issue of design in biology because the term is used quite a bit. But it's used in a way that's quite different from the standard sort of way you might use it in the engineering sciences. Let me give you 2 quotes which I think kind of situate this whole debate. Richard Dawkins, in the opening of his book, The Blind Watchmaker, will write, "Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose." Francis Crick, in his book, What Mad Pursuit, will write, "Biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved." So you have here a tension that's biologists are aware of. There's this appearance of design in biology, but when we look at the nuts and bolts of biology, when we really get to the theoretical foundations, actual design, the work of a designing intelligence or some real teleology is just supposed to evaporate. For Richard Dawkins, who's a hyper-Darwinist, all of it devolves ultimately to natural selection. That's the big designer substitute for him. Now, the thing is, once the question is raised, okay, real design versus apparent design, then one might ask, well, what would it take to really nail down real design? Could there be real design in biology? What might that look like? Now, if we backtrack a little bit, we find that in many special sciences, the sifting of real intelligence from the effects of natural forces comes to the fore. I mean, you look at special sciences like forensic science, archaeology, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Are those signals from outer space that are coming to us, are they actually designed, or is it just random noise? And even our way of carving up experience, we distinguish between randomness, chance, accident, natural forces, material processes on the one hand, and design, purpose, intelligence, intention on the other. It's a way we make sense out of the world. And yet when we look to biology at the nuts and bolts level, we are told that, in fact, there is no real design there. It is all natural forces that, given enough time, just allow history to run its course and out come intelligent beings like ourselves. In fact, it's been put to me that our intelligence is not something that's fundamental, doesn't reflect any fundamental reality to the world. It's just an afterthought, as it were, of evolution, that we are here, we have this intelligence because it's a survival strategy. It helps us to survive and reproduce. But let's look at these special sciences which sift the effects of intelligence from natural forces. Archaeology, is this an arrowhead? Is that just a random chunk of rock? Is that a burial mound, or is that a naturally produced mound? We ask these sorts of questions all over the place. And it seems that we have methods for detecting design in these areas. And it's not just that we use this in various special sciences. I would put it to you that these methods of design detection, that we need them to keep science itself honest. If you will, data falsification in science is something that we discover through methods of design detection. So consider, for instance, the case of J. Hendrik Schön. He was a scientist at Bell Labs who was publishing fast and furiously, had, I think, about 7 papers in Science and Nature, as well as many other publications. He was nailed for data falsification. Now, how did that happen? It turned out that he, as a physicist, he claimed to have produced experimental research from 2 apparatuses that produced the same distribution of errors. Now, why is that significant? Why did that catch the attention of the scrutiny board at Lucent Technologies that was investigating that case. Why was that significant? Well, imagine that you're seated next to somebody on an exam, and you're taking a multiple choice test, and you want to determine, is this person copying you or isn't he? Well, if you answer all the questions correctly, it could be that if the person checks off all the correct answers, he or she happened to know the correct answers. The way you would nail that person is by randomly choosing from the incorrect answers, and if you had the same distribution of errors, although it could reasonably be thought that the person knew what he or she was doing and got the same set of right answers, it would be unreasonable to think that this person could get the same exact pattern of random incorrect answers. As Aristotle put it, there are many ways to get the wrong answer, only one way to get the right answer. And so when you have this sort of match, this coincidence of something that's highly improbable and that's also independently given or specified, that really nails it down for us. And in that case, we know that we're dealing with a designing intelligence. Well, that's exactly what happened when Lucent Technologies looked at the research of this J. Hendrik Schoen, and he did not come up with the experimental protocols. They decided that he had, in fact, cheated, and all his research is now discredited. So now let me give you another example of how this sort of design detection works, because perhaps something a little bit more homespun. If you all saw the movie Contact that came out summer of 1997, this was based on a novel by Carl Sagan. In that movie, this is about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. It was the key players in it. Well, it was Jodie Foster, who was playing a radio astronomer who was looking for signs of intelligence from outer space. There's a key moment in the movie where contact is established, and it's when they receive a long sequence of prime numbers. These are numbers that are divisible only by themselves. And one, they came in as a sequence of beats and pauses. So 2 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause, 5 beats, pause, 7 beats, pause, not 9 beats, because that's also 3 times 3 as opposed to in addition to 1 times 9, and so on, all the way up to 101. To represent this, it would take well over 1,000 bits. So you have a complexity there. There are lots of numbers that are coming into you. What if they had only gotten the sequence 2 beats, pause, 3 beats, end of story? 2 prime numbers. Would you have contacted the New York Times science editor and said, we found signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. They've mastered the first 2 prime numbers. Maybe we can get some more. But no, that wouldn't do it, because if you're monitoring, as the SETI program is, millions of radio signals from outer space, it's very likely that you're going to come across that signal. In fact, if there are enough people in this room, if each of us got out a coin and started flipping it 6 times, and let's say recorded heads as 1 and tails as 0, we'd witness that sequence. In fact, probably a few times even. So it was a long sequence, there was complexity there, and there was also an independent, objectively given pattern, in this case, a sequence of prime numbers. And this has actually been the focus of much of my research for the last 10 to 15 years. What are reliable ways of detecting the effects of intelligent agents when the evidence is circumstantial? I mean, if we see the smoking gun, if we see the intelligence acting, if we've got ET and a little green man, then we don't need to worry about this sort of circumstantial evidence. But that's not the case. It's not the case in biology. It's not the case in many instances. It's not the case with intellectual property law often. So how do we nail the perpetrator in, let's say, an intellectual property case? How do we know that we're dealing with an intelligence and not just the results of natural forces? That's the sort of question we ask. And the criterion that I've identified, I call it specified complexity. It's that you have this complexity or something that's hard to reproduce by chance, but it also has this independently given pattern. Now, the thing is, if I just say independently given pattern, well, that's just a label. I mean, there's a whole theory that I developed. It's in line with what's called this Fisherian theory of statistical significance testing, where in that theory what you do is, in order to eliminate chance, you set up a rejection region in advance of an experiment. Take a sample. If the sample falls within the rejection region, then you reject chance. Now, there's some problems with Fisherian theory, but this is one of my projects in my book, The Design Inference, to actually clean up some of what was going on there, and then also extend this notion of specification or rejection region to the case where these could be given after the fact, rather than in advance of an experiment. That's going to be important if we're going to apply these ideas to biology, because in biology we are here after the experiment of life has been run already. So here we are, we're looking, and we want to see, are those patterns that we see in biology, are they given in a way where if we have improbability working for us, then in fact we should think that these systems are designed. Now, I lay out this whole design detection methodology. In a sense, what I'm doing in this book, The Design Inference, is a rational reconstruction of how we go about doing it in practice. So once we have this methodology, and there's a lot of discussion on the internet, does this work? I mean, for every person that you can give on your side that says this doesn't work, I can give you an equally prominent person on my side who thinks it works. So at any rate, yeah, there's a lot of discussion about it, and the decision is not yet in whether this approach to design detection will win the day. There is an alternative approach to statistical rationality known as Bayesian decision theory, which also tries to make sense out of it. But anyway, I'm just saying that there is this method then that I have proposed. It's out there. The question is, what happens when we start applying it to biological systems? Now, let's just backtrack a little bit. What sort of systems should we be looking at in biology if we're going to apply these design detection methods? The thing is, in biology, we're not dealing with toy problems like flipping coins or bit strings of prime numbers. These are highly complicated systems. And I would put it to you that actually what has happened in biology is that evolutionary biologists have often hidden behind the complexities of these systems. It's common coin within the evolutionary biological community to speak as if the evolution of the eye has been thoroughly explained. But what has actually been explained? If you saw the PBS Evolution series, which came out right after 9/11, there was a book that came out with that by a fellow named Carl Zimmer, and the book is called The Triumph of Evolution. It's interesting that I don't know of any other areas in science where you write the triumph of something, like the triumph of general relativity, let's say. But that's by the way. So you look at this book, and on the front cover, there are all these eyes in various degrees of complexity. And what I would put to you is that what the evolutionary biologists do is they, as it were, slap these eyes on the table, draw arrows from less complex to more complex, and say, see, the eye evolved. But what they don't tell you is how eyes are actually built in embryological development, what sort of changes in embryological development have to take place, what genes have to change for these changes to take place, and how likely it is for these genes to change in the appropriate way. So there's a real lack of causal specificity there. And that's why you're going to find biologists like James Shapiro, for instance, at the University of Chicago, saying that there really are no detailed Darwinian accounts for any of these complex systems, only a variety of wishful speculations. So the problem is, if we're going to try to do this analysis on the eye, this is way too complex to really work. So what do? Well, we go to simpler systems. We look at the biochemical level. And this is where some work of my colleague Michael Behe comes in. He will look at what are called biochemical machines. These are little molecular motors at the subcellular level. The one that's become really the icon of intelligent design is what's called the bacterial flagellum. This is a little bidirectional motor-driven propeller on the backs of certain bacteria. It can spin up to 100,000 RPM. It can change direction in a quarter turn. So imagine a blender that's spinning at 100,000 RPM. It stops. In a quarter turn, it's spinning full speed in the other direction. You look at this under an electron microscope. Got a long whip-like tail that serves as the propeller. There's a universal joint, a hook, drive shaft, discs that mount this apparatus onto the cell. There's stators, O-rings, and acid-powered drive. And that doesn't describe even all the signal transduction circuitry, which tells this apparatus when to move. Howard Berg at Harvard calls this the most efficient machine in the universe. How did it come about? Okay, it's not just that I've pulled out this example just as an isolated example. There is uniform problem with the biological community explaining systems like that. But it's not just that they are unexplained. They have clear design characteristics. And when you start subjecting systems like this to this sort of design detection methodology that I've outlined, and we start looking at trying to get a handle on the sorts of probabilistic hurdles that need to be overcome for these systems to come about through naturalistic, gradual, as Darwin put it, by means of numerous successive slight modifications, we find that they really resist Darwinian explanations, and that they give all the appearance of being designed, and that they, in fact, that these methods of design detection apply to them. Now, this work is just getting started. I mean, a lot of the work in intelligent design is on the evolvability of these systems, and I would put it to you, even systems like the bacterial flagellum are amazingly complex. And so I think some of the best research now in intelligent design is by a colleague of mine named Doug Axe, where he's not looking even at systems like this, but at individual enzymes and their evolvability or unevolvability. So let me just wrap it up then by saying what we have minimally with intelligent design so far are methods of design detection that are now being applied to biological systems, which are showing that there are deep problems with these Darwinian and other material processes bringing about these systems that supposedly have been accounted for. You know, and the thing is, you have very diverse accounts in the biological literature. People saying that it's like arithmetic, Darwinism is established, there is no problem, and others who are now expressing real doubt, who are not even design theorists. And so intelligent design is now one voice there. And I would put it to you that whether, from what I've said now, whether you think it is science, at least I want to get you thinking that it could be science, and then we'll talk more about whether it actually is science. Thank you.
My presentation is going to be visual on the screen above me, where you can look at what I'm planning to say. The question is intelligent design science? And before I go forward with my point of view on this, I want to talk about something that my opponent did not talk about, which is God. And use my computer here. God, what is God? Well, the answer to that is it depends on what you think, what you want it to be. And there are a variety of versions of God. One is that God created the universe and then sat back to watch without any further interference. This is the version of God that Albert Einstein had. He held this belief. It's not a testable belief. Albert Einstein had faith in this belief. The second version is that God created the universe and continues to participate in creation. Some people think he creates each new human life. Some people think he created the first human life. This is the version of God that comes out of the Bible. This is an intelligent designer. The first version, the second version is an intelligent designer. The first version may or may not be, but usually it's conceived in a way that God sat back and watched. Just as a sub-point, scientists have created life without any help from this version of God, so that if this is what God does, scientists already have played God and may play God all the way. The third version of God is that the universe and God are one and the same, and the universe and God evolves over time. This is the core belief of Hindu-derived religions. It's consistent with evolution. In fact, you can define it in such a way that everybody believes in this kind of God, because if the universe is God, you think the universe exists, then God must exist. So the point of all of this is that different people can say they believe in God and have very, very different perspectives on the world. And in my research over the last 5 years, I've discovered, I haven't found all millions of variations, but I have found almost as many variations as people that I've met and talked to about this. So the intelligent designer that we're talking about is this version number 2. It is the notion of a God who is actively involved in creation right now, not a God who comes out of creation or a God who started the whole thing going. According to the Bible, and the Bible is the main source of this version of God, the Bible says in Genesis 1:11, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. And the notion is that God created every single plant as we see it today. And so I want you to look at the corn in that picture over there and ask you where it comes from. Did God create corn? Well, it turns out he didn't create corn. The Mexicans created corn 10,000 years ago, and they created it out of a weed. That's the weed that existed 10,000 years ago, and they were able to breed it and change its entire morphology into something that was edible and previously was not. So people were able to use a method of selection to obtain something that didn't exist previously. Human beings created corn. What about bananas? Have you ever thought about how bananas reproduce? Right? According to Genesis, the seed is in the earth, and it's upon itself. It keeps on reproducing itself. I haven't seen any seeds in bananas recently. In fact, there haven't been any seeds in bananas since bananas were first invented. So bananas can't reproduce themselves. Where do bananas come from? Well, there is a plant in Malaysia. It has 22 chromosomes. It produces a completely inedible fruit. There's another plant in India. It has 11 chromosomes. It has an inedible seed. You put these things together. This is done in about 500 BC, apparently. And you end up with a completely, it's really messed up bunch of chromosomes. It can't produce seeds, which is very nice because we can eat bananas. But it has 33 chromosomes, and it can only be reproduced over the last 2,000 years with human-assisted cloning. So if you've ever eaten a banana, you've eaten cloned food. What about domesticated animals? Where do they come from? Once again, the Bible says, well, you know, God created the animals according to their kind. Each one of them, cattle means domesticated animals, and wild beasts. Take a look at those two animals there. The one on the left is a sheep from France. The one on the right is a llama from Peru. It turns out that each of these animals, like everything else I've talked about so far, didn't exist before people created them. These don't come out of one species. The sheep actually comes out of 3 different wild beasts. The llama comes from 2 different beasts that are so far apart, they were forced to mate with each other, presumably. So human beings, not God, created domesticated sheep and llama by interbreeding multiple kinds of beasts. The sheep in particular is just quite amazing because the breeding has, if you look at it, this kind of sheep has a coat, a wool coat, which you can just come off as a single coat. Man did that because that was easier to pull the wool off of the sheep. And then, of course, the most famous example of all of artificial evolution that has taken place is the Siberian wolf. That's what it looks like. Comes in Siberia, and we all know what that gave rise to, all these little pooches, right, who have very, very little to do with the Siberian wolf. A Chihuahua is essentially cannot breed with a Siberian. Chihuahua is the second one. It can't breed with a Siberian wolf. Human beings, not God, created dogs. You might say, oh, well, the dogs are the same species as the Siberian wolf. You know, we're not really changing species. Well, the whole concept of species is totally arbitrary. It's a made-up word. People made it up a long time ago. And in fact, Darwin was the one who said he was struck how entirely vague and arbitrary is the line between species and variety. So are the dogs different species than a wolf? Is the wolf different species than a dog? Well, it depends on how you define species, which is any way you want to, because people make up words and define them however they want to define them. So how did all this happen? Well, this is the way it happened. There were random mistakes or mutations that occurred in some animals in each of these cases. Human beings selected certain individuals to breed. So they looked at all of the dogs, or they were pre-dogs that they had, or they looked at all the weed-like corn or the pre-sheep, and they said, okay, this one has some nice characteristics. We're going to take this one and breed it. And then the next version, the next generation, all came from that individual. And the process was repeated over and over again. Now, what they realized, people have been as smart as we've been for a long time. We don't realize that. But they realized that if they bred together different species, that wasn't an accident. I am sure they did it on purpose, because by breeding together different species, you generate all these novel combinations of genes, and then you can pull out the characteristics that you want because they're going to occur. So people created, wool didn't exist before people created it. Fleece didn't exist. That's what llamas give rise to. And these human-friendly 10-gallon-a-day milk-producing factories we call cows didn't exist until we created them. Chickens didn't exist. Chickens come out of a jungle fowl in northern India that will fly away from you if you come anywhere near it. But chickens have been bred with a behavior so that they like human beings. So that's human-driven evolution. It's clearly happened. That's what we call artificial selection. It was the foundation, actually, for Darwin's theory. Those are all the things that it did. Now, how does natural evolution work? Well, same sort of thing. In fact, it's all the same, except for the number 2 over there, the selection process. The selection process is not carried out by human beings before human beings existed. The selection process is carried out by the environment that is going to say, okay, this animal, this plant, has certain genes which give it a better chance of surviving and reproducing. It's going to survive. And then everything else dies, okay? And the same process is repeated over and over again. So that's natural selection. The only difference between artificial selection and natural selection is what's doing the selection. Can we watch natural selection in action? Well, yeah, we can, actually. One of the most dramatic examples of natural selection is in human beings. And what's happened is human beings began from a Garden of Eden in northern Africa, and they then expanded out over the entire world. And if you go around the world and you look at people who have lived in one place for a long time, you notice they have different skin colors. So the girl there from Scandinavia, she's from Sweden, very light hair, very light face. Bishop Desmond Tutu's over here. This girl from Indonesia, this is a girl from Central America. They have different skin tones, and it correlates with how far they are away from the equator. What's really remarkable about the Central American girl is that the darkness of her skin is for completely different reasons than the darkness of the skin of the Indonesian girl. Her ancestors had to go over the Siberian bridge that occurred during the last ice age and back down. So her ancestors probably had lighter skin and then got darker skin, presumably. This happens because when you're high up in latitudes, you need more sunlight to come in and produce vitamin D. Okay, so it's a good idea for selection to select on lighter skins. And when you're down near the equator, you get plenty of sunlight, but you need to protect yourself from skin cancer. Those are metaphorical uses of the term. So if all human beings have a common ancestor or common ancestors, continuous natural selection occurred. That's just a fact between human populations. Now, I'm going to go one step further and show you this little virtual machine, okay? See a little thing there moving back and forth? Okay. That actually exists, it's a virtual machine, exists in a computer's memory, okay? And a group at MIT and Brandeis took these little things, virtual things, so they're in cyberspace, they're not real yet, put them in cyberspace. They can move, as you can see, but they can't go anywhere, okay? And they took hundreds of thousands of them, put them into the cyberspace, this virtual space, okay? And then the computer made copies of these things with errors. So the computer made thousands or hundreds of thousands of copies, but some of these things had errors. And then the computer did something rather nasty. It killed off all the ones except for the dozen or so sort of around the edge. Everything in the center got wiped out, okay? The ones that were somehow able to get to the edges better, they were the ones that survived. So, and then did this over and over again, 600 generations, and then the computer got a milling machine, and the computer created the actual robots, and this is what they look like, okay? So these things are real. They were physical things, and they were created after about 600 generations out of the thing on the top left. Now this is the question, this is the critical question. Who designed and built these 3 traveling life forms? It wasn't the scientists. The scientists designed that thing up there. They could have designed these things. They're not that complicated. Scientists could have, but they didn't. Okay, it wasn't the scientists. Was it something else? Was it some extraterrestrial intelligence? No. Was it God? I have no reason to believe that. What designed these things was natural selection. Okay? There is no other designer. If somebody in this audience can tell me what designed these things other than natural selection, I'd be delighted to hear during the question and answer period. Now, just to show you how far scientists have gone, 100 to 200 years ago, scientists would have unanimously told you that what I'm showing you in this little video right here was impossible, not just improbable, but impossible. What are these things? These are electronic dogs that were created by the Sony Corporation in Japan, and they're playing soccer. They're not being controlled by anything. They're controlling their own actions. They can see and hear. They try to please their owner. They like novel situations. It's all programmed into them. They learn and they adapt over time. They can see the ball, and they're going to kick the ball and try to get it to the other goal. And they're taught how to play soccer here. Sometimes they get into little fights over there. And when it gets hungry, this thing goes and finds food. The same exact kind of food you eat, actually, which is chemical energy. And this is on the bottom left, what's happening there. Okay. That little circuitry, you say, well, it's just a bunch of circuits. The circuitry over here actually belongs to the sea urchin, not to the dog. So you tell me which one of these things is more alive. The sea urchin, which can't do anything, or the Sony electronic dogs, which are making their own decisions. It can't evolve yet, but just give it time, okay? I have 1 minute left. I just want to show you, this is my son on the right and a monkey, I'm sorry, not a monkey, chimpanzee on the left. They both came out of embryos that are essentially identical. They're visually identical to each other. And these embryos develop differently because their DNA sequence is slightly different, which is what we have over here. Now, we actually are learning a lot. We know the entire human genome. We're going to have the whole chimp genome in a moment. And in fact, that's a brain of a normal mouse on the left. It has a smooth cerebral cortex. A single genetic engineering event, a single change of a gene, which scientists did in these mice, took that brain and made it look like this. The cerebral cortex doubled in size with a single gene. That's how much we know about how genes affect development. This is just a real quick experiment. I know I'm running out of time. If you imagine taking a chimp embryo and genetically engineering it with mind genes, you get something like that. Is that a human being? I don't know. If you imagine genetically engineering it just with genes that control appearance, you get something like that. That's a mutant chimp that looks like a human being. This is a thought experiment, okay? I'm going to jump ahead because I want to... This is the question of evolution. My debate opponent and myself, I think, agree that evolution occurred. The question is, how did the letters change? The scientific hypothesis is they changed through a process of random mutation, non-random selection, which we know causes evolutionary changes in other systems. I've just showed it to you. The intelligent design claim is that something more intelligent did it. So the question is the intelligent design claim science? Well, there's, I think, two problems. Is there any specific evidence that non-human directed genetic engineering, so that's the intelligent designer had to do, if such a thing exists, it had to do genetic engineering. I don't know of any specific evidence of that. And has anyone proposed an experiment that could detect specific evidence for non-human directed genetic engineering? And if the answers are no, theories of intelligent design are based on faith, not science. Thank you.
Well, let's talk about God just a little bit. Nothing that I said in my presentation mentioned the G word, and for a reason. I mean, what we're talking about with intelligent design is looking at finite material systems, patterns exhibited by them, and whether those patterns would indicate to us that they're the result of an intelligence. I was looking at finite things and inferring to an intelligence. Now, when you're talking God, Creator God, you're talking about the source of being of everything. That's the sort of God that was version 2. And the interesting thing is that I'm finding that there are proponents of intelligent design who cover all three versions. Antony Flew, perhaps the most prominent atheist in the English-speaking world, recently converted to some form of theism, but it wasn't version 2. He doesn't believe in an afterlife. He doesn't believe really in an intervening God in the sense that that's presented in Genesis, and yet he holds to something beyond the world, or beyond a materialistic conception of the world, I guess I should say, on the basis of intelligent design arguments at the origin of life. Now let's focus on that just a moment, because Professor Silver was bandying about the term creation quite loosely. I mean, all I really saw was recombinations of existing genetic material. When we're talking about the origin of a bacterial flagellum, how long has the bacterial flagellum been around? Maybe 2 billion years. Bacteria have had to get around their watery environments for a long time. But if that system evolved, okay, there had to be a point, a predecessor to that bacterium, bacterial flagellum, a predecessor bacterium that did not have the proteins that make up the bacterial flagellum, did not have the genes coding for those proteins, did not have genes homologous to those genes. Okay, the simplest life form that we know is something like a mycoplasma bacterium, which requires about 500,000 base pairs and needs to code for about 400, 500 proteins. I mean, you can knock it down a bit, but not much. You're going to need metabolism, genetic replication, machinery, all that stuff. So the simplest life forms we know are extremely complicated. This is something that Darwin had no conception of. Right? For him, the cell was basically a blob of jello enclosed by a membrane. The origin of life was not a significant problem in Darwin's day. It's now the most difficult problem confronting biology. Let me just say one last thing about these computer simulations. I work with engineers in the biocomputing field. I review articles for the IEEE. In each of those cases, the engineering is there. I think the misconception that Professor Silver is under is that somehow design has to be like an architect, where the architect makes a blueprint, and then the design is just built according to spec. Now, if you look at the evolutionary computing literature, in fact, when you have the right fitness function, then you've solved the problem. In fact, a Boeing engineer that I know of will refer to himself as a penalty function artist. That's what he does. He sets up the fitness functions, which then do all the design work. What Professor Silver didn't tell you was about what kills off those robots and those machines that don't, what is it about them that gets killed off? It's in the killing off that all the design work is done. What specifies what gets killed off? I can set up evolutionary scenarios in which things get killed off and nothing interesting ever happens. Okay? There are scenarios, for instance, and you can do this in biology as well. Saul Spiegelman has an experiment from the 60s in which he had polynucleotides in a replicase environment, and instead of getting more complicated or doing interesting things, they got simpler and simpler so that they could replicate as quickly as possible. These evolutionary computing experiments actually are better evidence for design than for any sort of blind, undirected evolution. Thank you.
Dr. Demsky has mentioned a couple of details of biological processes, which I'm unable to respond to, and most scientists are. The question is not the details, but the process. Very, very, very different. Natural selection suggests a process. It doesn't tell you the details. If you look at this little apparatus here, I have no idea how it works. I don't know if anybody in the audience knows how it works, but my scientific hypothesis is that it works according to electronic diagrams produced in California, and it was probably created in China. And I look at the back there, and it says "Made in China." So that's not a surprising or unscientific hypothesis. The question is there any other hypothesis that can be considered scientific to explain something like flagellum development or anything else? I haven't heard the process. We both agree that evolution occurs. We both accept the fact that genes are very important in development and creating morphology, which means that genes have changed over the millennia, or more millennia, over millions of years, genes have changed. How have they changed? There are changes in little atoms, little nucleotides, and the question is, how would an intelligent genetic engineer, other than natural selection, because that's what the intelligent designer claim is, an intelligent genetic engineer, have done this? Natural selection says it is being done by two parts to the process. Very simple. First, there are random mutations, okay? Just like there were in the pre-sheep. There are random mutations. Nobody decided what the mutations were. And then there is non-random selection. And when people do the non-random selection, you get out sheep with coats of wool, and the sheep don't want to run away from you. If nature is doing the non-random selection, what survives? What reproduces? Well, I don't know, and nobody else does, but there are some genes in each individual that allow them to survive at the expense of their cousins, at the expense of their far, far away cousins. That's what natural selection is. And the process I showed you, those Ivo dogs were not naturally selected, but they were just living things that were adaptable, made out of electronics. The other things, the three moving objects that I showed you, I want to know who designed them, because the engineers did not put those blueprints together for those particular things. The engineers put that original blueprint together. Those things came into existence through a simulated process of natural selection. All that says is natural selection can work. It's a scientific hypothesis. There's evidence that it works in some systems, and therefore it's a scientific hypothesis to explain how those little DNA changes occurred between our ancestor, ape-like ancestor, and human beings. I haven't heard an alternative hypothesis other than that's not how it occurred. Thank you.
Natural selection certainly works. No intelligent design theorist that I know of says that Darwin got it completely wrong. But what we are saying is that the theory has a limited purview or scope. How do we determine that? Is it rather the case, as Professor Silver seems to be implying, that it's just a necessary truth? I mean, this is just the way it is. What else could be doing it? It's interesting to me that he focuses on this neo-Darwinian mechanism where all the change is driven genetically. I mean, there are whole groups of biologists who don't think that it's all in the genes. So, I mean, there's controversy about that. But I think one thing to keep in mind is that with intelligent design, it is not fundamentally a theory of process. It's a theory of creative innovation. And those creative innovations, where do they come from? I mean, we are using an engineering paradigm there. And if we look at the history of life, in fact, that's what we see. We see sudden innovations. I mean, why in the world did Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge propose the theory of punctuated equilibrium? If the fossil record was this overwhelming vindication of gradual Darwinian change. It's that things suddenly appear, and then there's stasis over time. Now, that bespeaks much more of what might be called technological evolution. And if you look at the field of technological evolution, this is actually a well-worked field. Russian patent engineers who didn't have, or I should say, had a lot of time on their hands in the old Soviet regime, would study technological evolution. Genrikh Altshuler went through 400,000 patents, and he looked at trends. And one thing he found was that really the sorts of problems that you solve in technological evolution are of two sorts: routine problems and then innovative problems. And the routine problems are problems solved by trial and error tinkering. That's all that natural selection does. That's why increasingly you find scientists who raise doubts about evolutionary theory. Let me just read you something. This is a book that I picked up, 2005 publication. Robert Laughlin, Nobel laureate in physics at Stanford. He got the Nobel Prize in 1998 for the fractional quantum Hall effect, his work on that. And why is it that somebody of this caliber is questioning evolution? Hear what he says. Much of present-day biological knowledge is ideological. A key symptom of ideological thinking is the explanation that has no implications and cannot be tested. How in the world can Darwinian theory be tested if that's all there could be that could explain genetic changes? I mean, then it becomes a necessary truth. I call such logical dead ends anti-theories, he writes, because they have exactly the opposite effect of real theories. They stop thinking rather than stimulate it. Evolution by natural selection, for instance, which Charles Darwin originally conceived as a great theory, has lately come to function more as an anti-theory, called upon to cover up embarrassing experimental shortcomings and legitimize findings that are at best questionable and at worst not even wrong. Your protein defies the laws of mass action. Evolution did it. Your complicated mess of chemical reactions turns into a chicken. Evolution. The human brain works on logical principles no computer can emulate. Evolution is the cause. Now you might say, well, he's a physicist. What does he know? But you find that increasingly biologists are saying the same things. Franklin Harrell, the cell biologist at Colorado State University, 2001 Oxford University Press book, The Way of the Cell, writes there are no detailed Darwinian accounts for any of these complex biochemical systems. Then he adds, only a variety of wishful speculations. Now, when I pointed that out in a debate with Ken Miller, who's a very prominent ID opponent, this was at the World Skeptics meeting in 2002 in Burbank, California, what did he say in response? Did he come up with the detailed Darwinian accounts? No. He just said, well, Harold's an old guy. He's been retired for 15 years. End of story. Okay. There are real problems here. Whether we go with intelligent design, in the end, I just want to at least leave you with the sense that there are real problems that have not been solved, that you cannot just define the problem away or say that, well, it had to be a process of random genetic changes because that's all there could be. Intelligent design is effect to cause reasoning. You look at things in nature that exhibit patterns that in any other circumstance we would attribute to intelligence. Why won't we do it here? And what are the sort of obstacles that face these naturalistic processes? If evolution is a process, processes require resources to achieve certain things. Are the genetic mechanisms that current evolutionary theory gives itself adequate? These are the sorts of questions we're raising. Thanks.
It is interesting, and I don't usually decide what I think based on what others think. I come to my own conclusions. But certainly when we look at Charles Darwin's life, it's very instructive. When Charles Darwin was a young man, he was studying to be a minister. He believed deeply. He had great faith. And it was based on a logical argument that he thought couldn't be destroyed. And this is how the argument goes. The argument goes as far back as we can trace ourselves into our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. All of our ancestors are human beings, right? That's what everybody, you say that. And so if you are smart and you extrapolate backwards, you say all of their ancestors had to be human beings, all the way back to the first human being. Now, you get to that first human being, and you say to yourself, it is probabilistically absolutely impossible for that human being to come together all at once. I agree. It is absolutely impossible to build a 747 all at once also. And so that's why Charles Darwin, this is the classic argument from the minister named Paley, which is if you see a watch on the ground, you know there had to be a watchmaker. And if you went off onto Mars and saw a watch on Mars, yes, that's correct. There would have to have been somebody intelligent to have made that watch. You would have been absolutely correct to make that conclusion. The problem with the argument is not the logic. The problem is the assumption. There wasn't a first human being. If we go back in time and you look back and you will see there was a gradual change from ape-like species into human beings. There was no first human being. You go back before the ape and you find monkeys and mammals, and you go back and back and back, and the process may have had some jumps, and that's easy to explain by gene duplication, but I'm not going to get into those details. If there was no first human being, the argument falls apart. How do we know that there was no first human being? How do we know there was something halfway between chimpanzees and human beings? Well, I'll tell you how we know. A chimpanzee and a human being could probably breed and give you something that came out that was halfway between a chimpanzee and a human being. We know from other animal species that species as far apart as the chimp and human, and it's closely related chromosomally, can breed with each other. We know that. We've seen it. The same thing could happen. I'm not suggesting we should ever do such a thing. It's a thought experiment. But there you've got it. That's halfway between a chimp and a human being, and if somebody was unethical enough to do that right now, it would be right in front of us for us to see something halfway between, something not quite human, but not quite not.
next thing is for me to pose a question, and then Dr. Silver will pose a question to me after he answers mine. Yes, I am to pose a question to Dr. Silver, and I want to just give a little preamble because just to set the context for the question. Back in 1999, I was at a conference at MIT, and I asked a fellow named David Sloan Wilson, evolutionist, this question, or sketched out a scenario. I said, look, imagine that you have a super genetic engineer, biologist, and what he does is he creates an apparatus like the bacterial flagellum. Let's call it some sort of bacterial stinger that explodes other bacteria and then allows the bacterium with that stinger to consume the other bacterium. Let's say this is nowhere represented in the biological world. Creates it, removes all evidence of having been the creator, sets it out in the natural world. What is a biologist going to say when confronted with that, if the biologist does not have intelligent design in his or her biological tool chest? And I put it to him, well, wouldn't the biologist then just reflexively attribute this system to natural selection, to non-design, but in fact it was designed? And so my question then is, how can evolutionary biology as currently conceived be testable without intelligent design as some sort of foil? Without it as a scientific alternative, given that sort of question in the background, for example.
Scientists don't pretend to know the truth. If any scientist tells you they do, they're not telling you the truth. We think and we look at evidence and we make hypotheses and we look at the support for those hypotheses and we keep an open mind if we are good scientists. That's the way science behaves. The question I just posed to me is, what is the foil for natural selection? Well, I'd like to hear a foil for natural selection because I still haven't heard the alternative other than some genetic engineer that we can't see. It exists someplace else. Maybe it exists everywhere, but we can't see it. Or it comes from a different planet or from someplace else. That genetic engineer came to Earth and tweaked the nucleotides. Remember what we're talking about. What is evolution? Darwin didn't know this, but we now know what evolution is. Evolution is tweaking DNA bases. The only difference between a chimp embryo and a human embryo, doesn't matter how you say it, the only difference between those two embryos, look at them under the microscope, they look the same. They have slightly different DNA sequences. They may have slightly different RNA sequences. That's genetic code. That's what makes either my son on the one hand or gives rise to a chimpanzee on the other. So the question is, what caused those DNA changes to happen, to exist? The natural selection argument is they happened by accident. We know that's true. My opponent will admit that mutations happen all the time. And then the second part is the non-random part that we don't like to think about very much, which is that we killed off all of our cousins that weren't as smart as us over the last million years, which we think is very immoral today. But that's what we did in the past. That's natural selection, unfortunately. I don't know what the alternative is to natural selection. Now, am I supposed to present a question? Okay. So the question for Dr. Demsky is, can you describe an experiment that would show a intelligent genetic engineer's handiwork today, somewhere?
What we're looking at principally these days within intelligent design is obstacles to evolvability. And it seems to me that it has to work both ways. I mean, if you look, for instance, at the origin of life field, go back to the very beginnings, let's say in the 1950s with the Miller-Urey experiments. you had these, basically these traps and these where you had various chemicals, you were shooting electrical charges through it, then you were finding that you were getting these basic building blocks of life, some basic amino acids. Now, it was very likely that you would get these. So here you had a scenario in which it was highly probable that you could get these basic building blocks. And that was pointed to as well. It's not difficult to get these things, and how much more difficult will it be then to explain the origin of life? Well, it turned out to be much more difficult because getting the building blocks was easy. Arranging those building blocks into coherent biomacromolecules and then into whole assemblages of them, that proved to be very difficult. And so I would, in fact, put it to you that origin of life research is stymied at this point. There are lots of proposals, but nothing that seems to be really going anywhere. Now flip it around. Here you have something that's biologists will tend to point to when things are highly likely to happen, but what if there are probabilistic obstacles? And what if they become increasingly insuperable? Well, doesn't that then point in the other direction? The inadequacy of these material processes. Why does the evidence only go one way in confirming neo-Darwinism and chemical evolutionary scenarios? Why doesn't it also go the other way? Now, one thing that I'm hearing from Dr. Silver is that somehow we have to have our hands on the designer. We have to see the designer. If we get these signals from outer space that have clear signs of intelligence, we don't know who the alien was. We don't know if the alien is using comparable technologies to us. We don't know anything about the causal processes. And yet, from the design features, we can tell that we are dealing with a designing intelligence, however that design got there. I think that is the crucial thing. Now, the question is, how did that design get there? What happened in the history of life? What were the pathways that material objects, that these evolving systems traced out? That becomes an interesting question, okay? And certainly we have our work cut out for us. But I think to pretend that all these problems have been solved within a neo-Darwinian framework, I think that's just sheer fancy at this point. And it is not just the design people who are saying this. I mean, I read you the Laughlin quote, but you can find many biologists, when they're looking at the actual evidence. You have a whole. It's not just, as I said, that you look at the bacterial flagellum and we haven't explained it. It is all of these systems across the board are unaccounted for. Now, what would an experiment look like? The strongest line of evidence that I see at this point, strongest type of experiment, is where you look at, in this case, individual enzymes, because that's some research that I'm actually aware of, and what you do is you look at the evolvability of those systems by perturbing these systems. You can perturb active, inactive sites. When you do enough perturbation, it turns out the catalytic activity gets so low that it could have no biological function. That's the direction in which this work is going. So you cannot explain by some sort of gradual, indirect Darwinian pathway. So what you have is an island of functionality surrounded by an ocean of non-functionality, and you cannot get to these systems in or out by, as Darwin put it, numerous successive slight modifications. Now, it seems to me that is evidence for intelligent design and against a Darwinian account. Now, when we say evidence, one thing I think we need to keep in mind is that evidence is itself, what constitutes evidence, is not itself decided by evidence. It is decided by what we are disposed cognitively to take as evidence. I don't think there's anything that I could say to Dr. Silver that would get him to count something as evidence for intelligent design. On the other hand, there's much that he could say to demonstrate to me that something does count as evidence for neo-Darwinism. Okay? Because intelligent design is glad to go as far as possible with these material mechanisms. But it is also going to say it seems that there are clear limits to what these material mechanisms can accomplish, and that it needs to be supplemented by some form of real teleology or intelligence. So why don't I leave it there, and then we can try to wrap it up.
Now we'll have 5-minute closing statements from each speaker, beginning with Professor Silver.
The problem I see in the intelligent design claim is I'm not quite sure where it is or what it is. No biologist can pretend to know what is the simplest form of life on Earth today, which is a bacterial cell. How did we get from molecules to a bacterial cell? I don't know. Okay? Hypothesis is natural selection, scientific hypothesis. We have no idea what the details are. Some people say, oh, well, it's RNA, probably not protein. You know, we can argue back and forth and back and forth. But we really don't know how molecules came about to form the first cell. And it can never happen again, because if any molecules come together containing the energy required to replicate themselves, they'd be eaten right away. So once it happened, it's too late. No other human species is going to evolve on Earth because we're not going to let them. But going from molecules to cell, and going from a simple cell to multicellular organisms, and then along that line, it's a different sort of problem. Because from that first cell to everything that exists on Earth today, it's the same DNA. In fact, there was this unbelievable experiment. Scientists get shocked, actually, by these experiments. And I used to be a physicist, and, I was pretty bewildered by biology, too, when I was a physicist. And then I became a biologist and more cynical. The amazing experiment done in the 1970s at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory when I was there is they took a gene that had a yeast cell, and if you mutate a particular gene in that yeast cell called Sark gene, the yeast cell can't live anymore. It can't replicate. It can't carry out functions of life. Human beings in our DNA have a very similar gene. And the amazing thing is, when you take that gene from humans and stick it into the yeast cell works fine. So here you've got a yeast cell, far away, different from us. And human beings, and we have still preserved this gene, which hasn't changed in its function, over 1 billion years. Why? Why would do that? Well, it's a pretty good gene. It's an effective gene. Now, if there was some kind of intelligent design, why would the intelligent designer feel like he had to use the same gene over again and not just, make up new genes? Scientists make up new genes in the laboratory all the time based on functions that don't exist, that just didn't happen to be used by nature. So intelligent design claim is a claim from faith. And natural selection, although we don't understand the details of how it works in many, many, many cases, and they are lots and lots of details, is a scientific hypothesis. And that's what I claim is the difference between the two.
Let me just briefly speak to this question of the commonality of genes across the living world. Certainly it bespeaks a common cause, but is it common descent? Common evolution? Is it that things descend from a common evolutionary ancestor, or is it common design? Dr. Silver asks, why would a designer reuse a given gene? Well, if the model for evolution, and we both agreed that evolution has occurred in some sense, but in what sense? If the evolution in question is a form of technological evolution, then indeed, it's common practice in technological evolution for designs to be reused. There will probably be circuits in your computer and your television and your radio that are going to be similar and perhaps even interchangeable. So that sort of argument doesn't really cut any ice. It's going to work both ways. So you're going to need to have some sort of discriminator. And that's why looking at the limitations of these Darwinian and other naturalistic mechanisms in producing biological complexity, that's why there's so much focus on it in the design community. Now, I want to, in wrapping things up, try to just frame this. Where is this debate? Dr. Silver is putting it in terms of science and faith. I want to frame it a little differently. 3 years ago, I did a debate at the American Museum of Natural History. Michael Behe and I were pitted against Ken Miller and Robert Pennock. And as with most debates, you have a debate question. And the debate question in that case was blind evolution or intelligent design. That's the question that I received in the first email about whether I would be willing to do this debate. When I showed up at the auditorium in Manhattan, and I looked at the program guides, the word blind had been dropped. Suddenly it was evolution or intelligent design. Now, I submit to you that intelligent design is not opposed to evolution. It is opposed to a blind form of evolution, and it says that blind form of evolution is testable. Neo-Darwinism is a blind form of evolution, and we should be able to test it. And insofar as we test its adequacy, and find it lacking, then that will constitute evidence for intelligent design. And why is it that whenever criticisms of Darwinian theory are raised, even by people who have no creationist or intelligent design background, the worry is instantly, you're a creationist. It is because these theories are in opposition. It is blind evolution or intelligent design. That is the proper contrast. So let me then say this, where I see this going and the significance. I think Darwin, what he did was he gave us a theory, which has been elaborated on, which gave some sort of theoretical grounding to the idea that intelligence was unnecessary. I mean, Francisco Ayala has expanded on this at length, that intelligence was not necessary, that all of the explanatory, all the heavy lifting in explaining biological complexity could be done by these material mechanisms. Now, intelligent design, I mean, it's an old idea in some sense, but what has not been there is a theoretical grounding for intelligent design. I put it to you that is, in fact, what is now happening. And we are getting stuff published in the peer-reviewed literature. It's small, but it is happening. In fact, it's creating quite a furor. But let me give you one last thing, because I want to give you a sense that not everybody thinks that this business of intelligent design is bad for science. And here, I just want to close with a quote by a very distinguished paleontologist. This is David Raup, who's many years at the University of Chicago. I've corresponded with him over the years. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences. And he wrote me as follows: if some natural biological process, as yet undiscovered, yields the organisms we have without relying solely on conventional natural selection operating on random variation, then Darwin et al. Have found a mechanism that works in simple cases, which it certainly does, and both of us are agreed that it does, but misses more important mechanisms of evolutionary change and adaptation. The search for the missing mechanisms can only be helped by people like you, people like who? People like me and others in the intelligent design community who deny that mechanism is the right category for understanding these systems in the first place, can only be helped by people like you asking the tough questions. And then he closes, "Keep at it!" exclamation mark. And my colleagues and I indeed intend to keep at it. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank both our speakers, and we have about 20 minutes for question and answers. Yes, gentlemen, speak up loud so that we can all hear you, too.
This is a question for Dr. Silver. Dr. Silver, you held up a small electronic device, I believe it was. You claimed it was a product of intelligent design, even created, I believe was the word you used. What religious faith was that statement based on?
That's my scientific hypothesis based on my understanding of how electronics works and my knowledge about it.
So, in front of the audience today, then, you made a design inference based on the evidence without a religious faith, the foundation of that design inference. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, you said.
Mark Skousen. I'm trying to figure out what intelligent design is. When Professor Silver, when you first talked, you said there was natural selection and artificial selection, and you used the breeding of animals and plants and so forth as artificial selection. In my mind, that's intelligent design, human intelligent design. So, is this a game of semantics that we're playing, or what's the...
No, because let's be very clear about what we're talking about. We're not talking about human intelligent design. That's not what this argument is about. We know that humans are, or can be, intelligent, and they can design things. We're talking about superhuman or non-human intelligent design. The example I gave you to compare artificial selection with natural selection was to show you that the step-by-step process of artificial selection is the same as the step-by-step process of natural selection. If you accept artificial selection, it seems to me you have to accept the idea that natural selection can also cause magnificent changes like that as well.
Let me follow up if I could on that, because to me, there is a big difference. You don't have to introduce God or anything. Just talk about the science here. You have natural selection, which is purposeless. You don't know, you can't predict it, and so forth. However, human intelligent design, or what you call artificial selection, is very purposeful. In fact, dog breeding, which you used as an example, the domesticating animal was a for-profit capitalistic venture over thousands of years, and that's why all these different animals were created. So it is purposeful, so it's not a blind watchmaker at all. You follow me?
So that's artificial selection is not a blind watchmaker. Well,
so
to a certain extent it was.
That's the difference between natural selection and artificial selection. Very different.
The artificial selectors, called breeders or agriculturalists in the old days, they didn't really know what they were going to end up with. I mean, they were pushing, step by step towards a particular goal, having sheep with more wool that could be clipped off more easily. If you said, well, what are you going to end up with after you do this? Not one of them had a clue. Now, let me tell you about natural selection, because we didn't talk about this tonight, but when I was working in the laboratory, I did it all the time. What do you mean? What does it mean that I did it? You have a culture of bacterial cells, simple cells, and you want to get a bacterium that's going to be resistant to a particular drug. We didn't design the bacterium when we wanted that. We just put a little bit of the drug into the dish, and the bacteria that were susceptible to the drug died. The ones that were resistant survived, and we added more of the drug. And the ones that were a little bit resistant, some of those became more resistant. That was a process of natural selection, not artificial selection. We didn't tell bacteria which ones to breed and which ones not to breed. It was natural selection, and we were the selecting force. So instead of human beings being the selective force, which is what happens when we do it in a petri dish, nature, environment. Now, do I know what the end point is? Is it all hopeless? To tell you the truth, I have no idea. Okay? Do I know where it all started? No, I don't. But anyone who has a particular view of how it started or how it's going to end, if it doesn't come from evidence that we know about from science, well, you have faith in one view or another. As I said, there's lots of different views of God. 99% of the people on earth believe in some version of God. But I would bet that the version of God that somebody in this audience believes in has no relationship whatsoever to the version of God of the people that I spent 8.5 months traveling with in Asia.
Yes, you may.
My question is for Dr. Dembski.
Loud.
You mentioned, Dr. Demsky, you mentioned the movie Contact at the beginning, right? And remember the scene where Jodie Foster asked, what was that actor's name? McConnelly or? Yeah, that's him. The priest. If he was violating Occam's razor by postulating God. I would like for you to discuss whether or not you think your theory violates Occam's razor.
I don't think so, because
Why don't you explain to the audience what Occam's razor is?
The idea with Occam's razor is that you don't want to multiply entities or explanatory tools beyond what's necessary. So to explain friction, you're not going to invoke little gnomes that are pushing back at the object that's sliding over the surface, even though that might, that could be an explanation, but there's no reason to do it because there's simpler ways of explaining it. But I think that's precisely the point. I mean, And if you look at actually my work in the design inference, I give chance and necessity and their combination, these sorts of materialistic factors, first go. I mean, design, as it were, becomes an explanation of last resort. You know, we want to explain as far as possible by means of these naturalistic processes. You know, I mean, if you're a detective, you see a body on the ground, you know, your preference is not to create an extra workload for yourself, explain it by natural causes. But, you know, if you have a person, you know, that's clearly been murdered, then you're going to have to take it to a design explanation. Well, you know, this is the question of biology. Is it adequate? Can we adequately account for these systems in terms of these materialistic processes, or do we need to ratchet it up? I put it to you that science operates on the principle of causal adequacy. We need causes that are adequate to account for the things that we see. Intelligence is a known causal power. Okay? I mean, we needed to explain so many artifacts, things that might reach us also, and things that would not be even human artifacts. So if we require intelligence in all these other areas, why wouldn't we at least allow it as a possibility in biology? But it seems to me that those who resist intelligent design in science want to say that it couldn't even be a science. You know, I think that's where the problem would be. So I think actually the evidence is pointing to the necessity for some form of intelligence. But that intelligence, I mean, Jodie Foster herself accepted that there's intelligence behind that sequence of prime numbers. You know, but she just wasn't willing to take it to the next level, to God. And frankly, I think this is a strength of intelligent design that distinguishes it from William Paley's program in natural theology, which Dr. Silver alluded to. You know, if you recall William Paley's program, the subtitle of that book, Natural Theology, which came out in 1802, and on which Darwin cut his teeth. I mean, Darwin was subconsciously responding to that book in his Origin of Species. The subtitle of that book is Evidences for the Existence and Attributes of the Deity Collected from the Appearances of Nature. What these old titles are, we've shown to you all. It's evidences for the existence and attributes of the deity. So Paley's going to show that God exists and that God has certain characteristics. He's good, he is omniscient, omnipotent, all these things, all these perfections of God. How? Collected from the appearances of nature. So there's a reason from nature, how nature appears, finite, phenomena. And then go to the God, the infinite, personal, transcendent God of created Christianity. Well, there's no logical train that takes you there. So I would say, yes, in that case, Occam's razor is being violated. But to get to some sort of generic intelligence, there's no problem with that. And Kant, who's as sophisticated a thinker as you've ever been find, he realized that. He thought the design argument was just fine in terms of getting some sort of architect or designer, but he just said you can't get the creative Christianity out of it.
So,
Yes. Occam's razor is a great example of evidence for natural selection, and let me explain why, because it might be counterintuitive. If there was an intelligent designer, we would expect that he would design things intelligently, right? By definition, he's an intelligent designer. Which means that he would design an organism in the most efficient, practical way possible. But when we actually look at the genes inside organisms, we find a very, very convoluted way of getting to particular outcomes. So, for example, Drosophila, the fruit fly, which I studied a long time ago, has 2 wings. That's all it has, okay? But in its genes, there's the ability to make 4 wings. Why? Well, its ancestors had 4 wings, and the simplest way to go to 2 wings was in a convoluted process that maintained the genes but changed them a bit. And so Occam's razor doesn't work for living organisms because of natural selection only working on what already exists and not being able to put anything else in from what already exists. It can bring things together, and I think probabilistically, it's very important to understand what we're talking about here probabilistically. When you have a population that's breeding over a long time, you're talking about billions and billions and billions of events. So I don't know what the numbers are. You may know. But if you have billions and billions and billions and billions of events, there's a certain probability each time the more events you have that the prime numbers do show up higher and higher and higher in a row, just by chance.
Yes, gentlemen over
Actually,
here.
I need to follow up on that. I think there's an important point to keep in mind about intelligent design. We're not saying that this designer is clever. Okay? Putting the adjective intelligent in front of design is, as it were, redundant. And the reason we put it there is because, as far as the biological community is concerned, all design in biology is only the appearance of design. So intelligent, the work it's doing there is intelligent design versus appearance design. That's the work. Now, if you look at the biological world, you'll see all sorts of designs. You'll see jury-rigged design. You'll see exquisite design, as in the bacterial flagellum. And you'll see things that are not apparently designed at all. Okay? Now, that's not a problem for our program. Remember, Richard Dawkins writes, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of being designed for a purpose. For him, everything in biology needs to be, at best, the appearance of design. In order to counter that, all we need to show is that there are some clear instances of design in biology. We don't have to show that everything is designed. And natural selection, random forces, the effects of history, they can be there. I mean, a rusted old automobile exhibits design, but also exhibits the effects of natural forces, weathering, gravity, etc. And similarly with organisms. And similarly in a lot of contexts, teasing apart the effects of intelligence from natural forces is something that we do all the time. Right? If you have a Windows operating system, you have to clean out, to defragment your drive, do a lot of garbage collection and so on. But we assume that there's also intelligence at Microsoft. So there's so it's something, just to be clear on that, this is a minimalist program. In terms of adding things on top of it, is this design good, clever, is it moral? Those are separate questions. I think it becomes a red herring to try to introduce those at this early stage in the game.
Yes, the gentleman here.
Professor Demsky, if we work our way in time, now back toward way back, say 15, 50 years ago, but let's work our way back to the point where the Earth is just cooling now. Is it the contention that it was not necessary for design before that time, but that design necessarily only kicked in at the point where life evolved?
Well, if you look actually, the physicists seem much more comfortable with the language of design than the biological community. You can find people like Fred Hoyle, Penzias, Paul Davies, Freeman Dyson, even in some of his writings here at the Institute. You're going to find claims about some sort of design, tinkering, monkeying with the universe in terms of fundamental constants. There are also physicists like Stephen Weinberg who reject that. But my point is just that the physics community seems to be quite comfortable with design, and there can be design in the laws of nature, there can be design in biology, but it's a different sort of design. I think it becomes much more close and personal in biology, because when you're talking design in physics, it's at the level of the laws and constants. In a sense, those form the backdrop for everything else that happens. So in a sense, any designer there isn't getting his or her its hands dirty with what happens subsequently. When you're talking about design in biology, biology is only here on the Earth, 3.8 billion years. The first life forms or something like that, old. So it's, one way I like to think of it is imagine, you're looking at an oil painting. You can ask about the design of the canvas and stretcher and the gesso, and then you can also ask about the design of the paint that's on the painting. Is that paint, was it just strewn there randomly, or was it a beautiful landscape, and is that design? And so the design can enter at many levels. You look at Fred Hoyle's work, he will talk about this looking like a manufactured universe at all levels. So the design problem, it's all over the place in the natural sciences, but we're focusing on biology because that's where most of the contention is these days.
Here.
All right. Okay, so this is a question I'd like to hear a response from both Dr. Silver and Dr. Demsky after I'm done. So, to start out, Dr. Silver, you presented several examples of gross morphological changes induced by artificial selection or whatever, and recombinations of pre-existing biological structures like the sheep and the llama and so forth. Never an instance of, ex nihilo construction of any of these structures, but you were very quick to gloss over the finer biochemical details to which Dr. Dembski made reference. And so, it seems to me, as far as I can tell, that we don't seem to have any sort of detailed Darwinian accounts of any sort of the biochemical constructs like the Bacterial Flagellum or the blood clotting pathway or anything like that. And it seems that in the absence of even a single instance of a specified Darwinian pathway for a biochemical construct of such complexity, we don't really have any positive evidence at all to believe that naturalistic evolution is capable of producing such structures. So I submit, therefore, that belief in the power of naturalistic evolution to create such structures is at this point no more than faith. So
Let's stop there and have Professor Silver answer that.
Dr. Dembski and I agree that biological organisms are very complex. And in fact, he's mentioned all these scientists who have faith in intelligent design. Isaac Newton was a believer in a God-created universe, so was Francis Bacon, because back then, 16th, 17th centuries, we didn't understand biology. I mean, if I was living 10,000 years ago, I looked inside of a human being, I looked at you, and I said, there must be something special there, right, that I can't explain any other way. Now, there's something that's happened over the last 100 years, mostly, really since the beginning of the scientific revolution, which started in Europe 400 years ago. What's happened is we've learned a lot. At this point in time, we understand the biochemical processes that go on inside of a bacterial cell. Bacterial cell is pretty simple, but it is alive. And at this very moment, there is a collaboration with laboratories around the world to simulate the entire bacterial cell on the computer. And there are two different scientists racing to create it from scratch inside of a test tube. There's already a scientist at Harvard University named George Church who started with chemicals off the shelf, took those chemicals off the shelf, put them into human-made machines, and recreated a replicating system inside of a test tube. Okay? Now, so he created life. So what does that mean? What does that mean to me? Biological organisms are very complex. Do I know how the flagellum of a bacterium evolved in any detail? No, not whatsoever. Do I have a hypothesis of how it might have happened? Yeah, natural selection. Okay, I know it's worked in other systems. It's my hypothesis. Do you have an alternative? I've never seen, and I started out in physics, went into biophysics, and then molecular biology, and I have never seen any evidence for a violation of the laws of physics. As Dr. Dembski said, he doesn't disagree. From the Big Bang up until the formation of the Earth, physics explains it all, right? During the process of biological evolution, if there was an intelligent designer stepping in somehow and manipulating things, well, he would have had to violate the laws of physics. And you might have the faith that he does that, perhaps. I don't see any evidence, nor do I see a process.
I have to just add that I think Dr. Silver is bluffing here. If you're talking with this Harvard biologist about taking chemicals off the shelf, what chemicals are we talking about? We are not talking about things just found in inorganic nature. I mean, you can't even get nucleotides without some sort of biological origin. So it would seem to me that you're probably getting these chemicals from living systems already, and then how are they being put together? They're not being put together stochastically. These are intelligent agents putting them together. A colleague of mine named Paul Nelson advises that scientists line their labs, especially biologists, line their labs with mirrors to remind them that they are there in the labs at every moment, intervening and giving intelligent input to their experiments.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask both men, what's at stake in this debate?
Would you like to go first?
I mean, I think what's at stake in the first instance is the truth about biology. Is intelligence actually involved, or can purely natural material processes, without any prevision, intention, purposiveness, can they account for everything that we see there? And it seems to me that's an inherently interesting question. Now, it also has lots of implications, theologically, politically, etc. But that's where it has to start. And if we cannot give an answer to that question at that level, it really doesn't make any sense to start looking at the consequences.
I think that's the most important question that was asked here tonight. And let me tell you a little bit about how America differs in this way from other industrialized countries. In other industrialized countries, this is not a debate. In Western Europe, this is not a debate. In Asia, this is not a debate. And unfortunately, in areas of the country where large numbers of people believe in some form of intelligent design or creationism, they're going to change, or they want to change, the scientific curriculum, that all of the children in their communities are going to learn, and they're doing the greatest disservice to their children that I can possibly imagine. Let me tell you why this is such a disservice, and this is not just a philosophical or theological debate. Mississippi, which is one of the poorest states, it is the poorest state in the country, as far as I can tell you. How often do you think kids coming out of the public schools in Mississippi are going to have careers in science? They're not going to be the ones who are going to be doing molecular biology at Princeton University, or going into the biotechnology industry, which is going to be a powerhouse of innovation during the 21st century, developing cures for human diseases, developing new agricultural methods to feed people in the world. They're not going to be doing it because they're going to be learning. And I know that Dr. Dembski claims that this has nothing to do with theology, this has nothing to do with a particular view of religion. But in fact, we know that that's where they want to bring people. Unfortunately, that view of the world is not the view that is going to lead to a productive community or country in economic or any other terms.
Can I just respond? Somebody thinks being thrown out there. This is not a debate in other countries. It is a debate in other countries. My books have been translated into various languages: Chinese, Korean, Finnish. There have been debates at universities in Finland. I've been in just about every country in the English-speaking world on speaking tours. These things are, these ideas are getting out there. So we can discuss this. Now, in terms of the theological and political implications, I mean, those have been there with Darwinism right along as well. I mean, why does Richard Dawkins write that Darwin made it impossible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist? Why does Stephen Jay Gould and Ever Since Darwin write, ever since Darwin we know that we were created, ever since Darwin we know that we were not created in the image of the benevolent God? Why does Peter Singer, and I have this quote here, this is a book titled A Darwinian Left, Politics, Evolution, and Cooperation. Face the fact that we are evolved animals, that we bear the evidence of our inheritance not only in our anatomy and our DNA, but also in our behavior. This is going to have consequences for politics. So, I mean, we are getting at fundamental worldview issues, our origin story, and it will have consequences.
I just want to respond to the numbers. Point of fact. In poll after poll conducted year after year in the United States, 50% of Americans routinely say, when given a choice between did life evolve through a long process or did life evolve sometime within the last 10,000 years, 50% of Americans say life evolved or life did not evolve, but life was created in the last 10,000 years. I know that's not your position, but that's what 50% of Americans say. Nowhere else in the industrialized, or I would just speak of the industrialized world right now, is there a percentage anywhere near that in terms of people who don't accept evolution in some way.
Given that you brought up the G word, so to speak, and that it'll end up sort of helping us to frame your background, at least, I think most of us recognize that science, like any other field, is not only a collection of data, but making interpretation and hypothesis off of that data. So I was just going to say that sort of your hatred for God just sort of radiates in your pores. And I'm not trying to say that in an attacking way, but I'm just trying to ask so that I can better understand exactly where you're coming from as you're analyzing this data. What experience in your life, or what is it exactly that made you hate God so thoroughly?
Before I answer the question, I need you to tell me what your meaning of the word is.
My meaning of the word is the Judeo-Christian God. So it seemed like that was one that, especially on the little slide where you had the 3 versions of God among the millions that you ended up mentioning, that's the one that you had the most hatred and sort of antipathy for. And it's one that sort of really attacked who you were at your innermost being. At least that's sort of the assumption that I got from that. That's what I kind of saw from it. Now, maybe totally off, but I'm just asking, why it is that I would have such a sort of reflection off of that, and as well, just why is that? Why did I sense this anger whenever the Christian God was even mentioned?
So, as I showed you in my first slide, God can mean many different things to many different people. And if you use a broader definition, it includes beliefs that probably everybody in the world has. So that's why I asked you what version of God you were talking about. I've read the Bible from cover to cover. I just did it recently. And when I look at things like the quotes that I showed you over there, it's clear to me that if they're meaningful in any way whatsoever, they're not literal. They can't be. I proved that to you. So it means, well, the Pope, Pope John Paul II was the Pope. That's what he accepted. He said, yes, he accepted evolution was a theory that had a lot of evidence to support it, and he accepted the evolutionary trend, or the evolutionary process by which life came to be and to evolve on this earth. I don't have a hatred for God. I don't happen to have faith in the same kind of version that you described. That's not a hatred. That's just looking at different people's views and critiquing them. And so then the question is, I'm a scientist, I critique things. I'm also here at the Woodrow Wilson School, and there are critiques. So I'm sorry you saw that as a hatred, because that's not what it is at all. It's a critique.
Just have time for one more. Yes. When you think about the initial question that framed the debate, is intelligent design science? I'd love to be able to go away with a 1-minute answer in a sense from each of you. Why is intelligent design science? And because at this point, what I'm hearing largely is there are so many flaws in evolution that we're pointing out, so therefore it's science. And I'm not sure that that's doing justice to what you're saying. But on the other hand, I'm hearing you saying, but you haven't really given me any sort of theory, and I'm not sure that that's your point as to why it's not science. So kind of, why is it science? Why is it not science? So I can kind of go away and tell my wife and others, this is sort of a summary.
It's a great way to end it. I think where I want to go with this in terms of why is it science, the first step, it seems to me, is that there have to be reliable design detection methods. I mean, Johannes Kepler looked at the craters on the moon and said, gee, looks like there must be moon dwellers there, because how are you going to get those craters? Well, we know that meteor impacts and things like that can cause these craters. So we want to have some reliable ways of identifying the effects of intelligence. I think we have those now. I think that takes us well beyond where natural theology was in Paley's day. In Paley's day, natural theology, his idea of design was means adapted to ends. And it's true that if you look at artifacts, I mean, usually there's a function there of means adapted to ends, but is a river adapted to the end of dumping water into the ocean? And it's a definition which doesn't really, doesn't have much precision. So I think with this idea of specified complexity that I put forward, I think we do have a reliable method of design detection. Then the question is, well, if you have these methods of design detection, they work in all these different areas, can we apply them to biological systems? What is to prevent us from doing it? What do they tell us when we apply them to biological systems? And it turns out that the very sorts of things that are considerations and experiments that are pointing to inadequacies of the Darwinian mechanism are also saying, well, that's the very things that are proving obstacles to conventional evolutionary theory are the things also that are pointing to us to intelligence with these criteria for design detection. Now that just gets the ball rolling. I mean, we don't want to end this intelligent design program and say, well, see, it's designed, end of story, now we can just get on with our lives. And the whole point is to use that to make intelligent design into effective, fruitful, robust scientific research program. And so I think then there are a whole bunch of other questions that come about. I mean, there's the historical question. Well, how is that design expressed historically? I mean, once you don't have natural selection and random variation running the show, then the question of universal common ancestry and how evolution happened, those get thrown into question. Reverse engineering problems, teasing apart the effects of intelligence from natural forces. Right now within evolutionary theory, everything is natural forces. Well, what is the result of natural forces? What is the result of intelligent design? It seems that natural selection and variation are perfectly adequate to account for certain small-scale changes. I mean, insecticide resistance in insects, antibiotic resistance in bacteria. But how do you get insects in the first place? I mean, that's the sort of question. That's where we want to go. Then I think a big question will become, I mean, a lot of this whole notion of specified complexity in design detection can be reframed in information theoretic terms. I've done some of that in my book, No Free Lunch, and I now have a series of technical articles that I'm developing these ideas. So you look at the information in the cell. Is there information packing? Is information packed there more tightly than you would expect on a Darwinian hypothesis? I mean, on a Darwinian hypothesis, the genome is cobbled together over long evolutionary history. It's easier just to keep repeating and copying things. There's sort of phylogenetic and genetic inertia. So you just keep copying things instead of pruning it out and making it tight and efficient. Well, what if we find a level of efficiency? It doesn't have to be everywhere, but in certain types of codes in the gene which we wouldn't expect on the basis of a Darwinian paradigm, but we could with an intelligent design framework. I mean, that's a possibility. I mean, and the thing is, this ties in very nicely with the whole engineering literature. There's a whole literature on digital data embedding technology, steganography, where you embed information within information. So you could have a sequence that codes for a protein, but then maybe has some subsequence or something has further functions, or maybe read backwards. I mean, there are all sorts of possibilities. So, I see this as a potentially very fruitful way of looking at biology. And really, I mean, if I had my dream would be to see basically what evolutionary biology is being co-opted by engineers, because engineers realize just how hard it is to get things to work. It seems to me biologists, evolutionary biologists, can just imagine that things work and they're happy with that, and that's not good enough.
Dr. Dembski, I don't even disagree that natural selection occurs. He just says it's more limited, and I would argue otherwise. But it's important to understand why natural selection is a scientific hypothesis to explain biological organisms. Darwin made a number of assumptions, very, very few, actually. One was that random mutations occur, involving mutations. The second is that we all agree that happens at the DNA level, we now know. The second thing that Darwin hypothesized is that individuals with certain hereditable forms are better able to survive and reproduce than other individuals, and we all know that. The third thing that he said, and this comes from Malthus, is that every three-dimensional system anywhere on Earth has limited resources. And so you can't just have, if you have organisms that are reproducing themselves, it doesn't matter if the whole Earth is considered the system, because in the span of geological time, that's an instant. And so eventually you get to the point where all the organisms that are reproduced, that are born, don't have enough resources to feed them all. There's competition that's involved. And if you agree with the first two points, which are facts, and you agree with the third point, which is a fact, then natural selection happens. It's not a theory, it happens. And the problem I see with intelligent design is I'm not even quite sure where it's supposed to happen or how it's supposed to happen. I mean, is it the fact that, one version, I'll give you the version. One version is that, one by one, in each generation, the intelligent designer chose a particular base, what we call, a particular chemical entity, and to put it there. Darwinian view would say it happened randomly. The intelligent designer put it there, okay, and then somehow those individuals outbred the others, or everybody born in a particular generation had this new nucleotide chemical, I don't know. I mean, I've never heard exactly how this whole thing is supposed to work, which means, I mean, something that vague, to me, can't be a scientific theory.
Well, I'm sorry we've gone over, and I wish we could have continued this much longer. Some of you have questions. Why don't you come up and ask one for Professor Silver? And let us give a